Well, today we're going to talk about the next chapter, which is European expansion, the social and political transformations, social, economic, and political transformations that occur. Let us as a time frame, say roughly between 1450 and approximately 1600. Obviously, we need to distill a number of things because that's a long period, but there's some fundamental transformations that are going on at this point. The fundamental question that we want to ask here is, why Europe? Why does Europe expand? Why does not, let's say, China become the country which begins to colonize, which begins to explore, which begins to sort of dominate other parts of the world? Why is it Europe and not some other continent, some other area, some other country? Well, there's a number of explanations for that, and I would say, at the risk of sounding like I'm making a joke, that some of it's just plain luck. Maybe the Chinese could have done this, but they had no particular interest in it. They remained a fairly insular culture or civilization. They certainly had some of the technology ahead of time. We all know that they had gunpowder, and the Europeans were able to get that from them and elsewhere, but the Chinese had no interest in expansion. They were big enough, I suppose. The Europeans do, and for a number of reasons they're going to be able to do this, as I said, especially after about 1450. And I would distill it down to maybe several different kinds. I'll just call them revolutions. One would be an agricultural revolution. Quite clearly, Europeans learn how to grow food more abundantly. They become more productive in agriculture. And then you have also, let's just call it a commercial revolution. The expansion of money supply is going to be a very big thing, and of course gold and silver are going to be discovered in large amounts. I say discovered, certainly the Native Americans knew about them, but the Europeans were only intent on finding all that, and they're going to do that with exploration. And then you can call a number of other things. In addition to agricultural and commercial revolution, you can say also that there's kind of a technological revolution which fits into some of these things. One might even add, at the risk of sounding a little bit redundant, a kind of intellectual revolution, and maybe the Renaissance represents some of that as well. Europeans become organized. They have universities. Learning begins to become much more secular, that is to say, not so much theological, but going off in other directions, which would be called, if not scientific, pre-scientific. So you begin to get new kinds of horizons that develop in Europe. How does it all begin? Well, the agricultural revolution. This is not something that happens overnight. This is something that really is cumulative. It happens over more than a century. But you begin to get developments such as much better plows. The horseshoe, which might not sound like much, but it does enable the Europeans, to use horses instead of oxen. Horses are more durable. The collar harness, we've met this in another chapter already. The collar harness makes it possible to kind of yoke the horse and get him involved in the plowing of fields and so on. So a number of these kinds of developments, plus the fact that the three-field system has been introduced. We know this already, but it becomes even more efficient. Three-field system is important because you rotate your crops. That means you can always have at least two fields which are going to be producing food crops, and in one you leave that fallow, you put in some sort of a crop which actually puts nutrients back into the soil. All this means that Europeans are going to be much more productive in the growing of food. Then you have also changes in tenure. If you're a serf, there's not much future for you. The land is not yours. If you become much more productive, you're not going to benefit by it. But after the Great Plague, not so great, between about 1350 and 1400, much of the European population is wiped out. Well, the result is that there's also a lot of depletion of farmers, the depletion of manpower. And the result, of course, is going to be that there's going to be a premium put on skills of farming. And that's going to change the whole relationship of tenure between, let's say, the lords who control the manors and those who will need to do the actual farming. The result is going to be long-term leases, sometimes up to 100 years. And given the discovery of bullion, you're going to have a much bigger money supply. All this means much greater inflation, Inflation means that essentially it's for the benefit of the farmer on the long-term leasehold, because the long-term leasehold means you pay the same fixed rent for a very long time, and with money inflating, that means that it's going to be much easier for you to actually meet the terms of the lease. Result is long-term, the serf becomes the peasant becomes hereditary owner or holder of the land. This would be known as copyholds, quite common in various parts of Western Europe especially. So farming goes through a huge change in this period and makes it possible for Europeans to at least grow more food. The commercial revolution is something that becomes possible for a number of reasons. First of all, Europeans become much more adept at sailing. Some of this technology they actually get from Arabs, but in any case they're able to employ that technology. They develop different kinds of ships. The Portuguese, for example, developed something called the caravel. The caravel can be used. It's very easy to maneuver, much easier to maneuver than the earlier what they called galley boats. And it's dependent on sail power, much more so than ever before. 3 masts are going to be used, so they can take advantage, these ships, these caravels can take advantage of wind power much greater than anybody was able to do before. And the result is that they can carry much more cargo as well. So you have the technology just of how to sail, very important. Then of course there's other instruments, the astrolabe, which is a long-sounding name for a technical device, but it enables sailors to know where they are in terms of latitude, how far north, how far south they are. That is why Columbus, when he finally does sail in 1492 and he sails across the Atlantic, he knows exactly where he is. Well, at least north to south, so he can stay in sort of an even line all the way across the Atlantic. He thinks he's going to China. Well, he's a little bit off, isn't he? He gets to a place that we would eventually call America, which is actually named after Amerigo Vespucci, another explorer. But in any case, Columbus is the one who gets there, who gets to the Americas, and he does that because of this new technology and the use of multiple masts and the greater instrumentation, which allows this to happen. So this is the technology that I was talking about, and it has to do, of course, with navigation. Then, of course, you have, I mentioned, a commercial revolution. Well, that's going to occur for a number of reasons. First of all, the discovery, when the Spanish send Columbus, the Portuguese have been involved also in sending sailors abroad. When they find America and they're able to employ a system, they're actually looking for gold and silver. They will find silver, much less perhaps than they had hoped to, but what they do also is they'll colonize these areas and they will more or less strip them, and they'll set up a system which is very similar to sort of feudal type of relationships, but in any case, it works for the Spanish, it works for the Portuguese, it doesn't work so well for the Native Americans, who are by and large going to die out, which will introduce another element of what I call the commercial revolution. Commercial revolution is also based on the fact that as you begin to get more and more exploration of the Americas, as they're conquered more and more by, especially by the Spanish, the Portuguese, of course, take an area that will be known as Brazil. As all that happens, as all that sort of spreads out, what you have is the mass colonization of all of America, including much of the Caribbean, especially by the especially by the Portuguese, but especially by the Spanish and to some extent the French and the English. What is happening is that a lot of the bullion is brought back to Europe. It enters into the money supply. This is going to help fuel trade. It's going to help fuel the commercial revolution that will occur in Europe. So you have that going on as well. In addition to that, as Europe begins to develop like this, you have the development of the productive system, which had been around for a while, certainly, called the Guild. The Guild is a way of sort of organizing production. As more money comes into Europe, as more agriculture develops, there, of course, is an increase in the and population is increasing also, I might add. There's an increase in demand, there's an increase in the ability to produce things. So you begin to get a much greater economy going. Now, what was the original impetus for all this? Why does Europe want to expand to begin with? Several reasons. There was always the motive to Christianize the rest of the world as much as possible, but I think even more so, and a number of the explorers actually admit that. Pizarro, for example, Hernando Cortez, who come to the Americas, what they had said quite explicitly was that they want wealth, they want money, they want bullion, they want gold. Well, we certainly wouldn't reject that kind of motive nowadays, but in any case, Europe is looking to expand for that reason also, simply to acquire wealth. But it's also looking to expand for other reasons, including, for example, to get some of the fine textiles from the East, to get the porcelains from the East, teas and spices and so on. Well, why now, though? Why in 1500 is Europe looking to expand there? Very simple reason. The fact that in 1453 Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Turks, and that more or less blocks the way of Europe getting to the Far East or China. It had always been cumbersome. Before ships could go around, let's say the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, Vasco da Gama actually does that. The Portuguese sailor does that in 1497. He gets all the way to India and establishes some outposts there. Until that's happening, basically Europe is blocked from getting to the Far East. That's why Columbus wants to get there. They want the fine textiles, they want the porcelains, they want the teas, the spices, and so on. So there's the motive also. And also I have to say also for, to some extent, food items as well. The European system is working better, but Europeans are also looking for other sources for that. So it is a quest to expand for fine goods, for certain textile goods perhaps, for certain kinds of things such as porcelains, as I mentioned before. So there is a quest for that as well. It's all about making money. It's all about acquiring wealth. So Europe is able to do that. Let's just sum up what we said. They're able to do that. First of all, the agricultural revolution makes it possible for Europe to develop that much more so Europe can at least begin to feed itself much better. The commercial revolution, which means actually also the price revolution, as money is introduced, prices will go up. That's an even greater incentive to bring things into Europe because there's money now, money supplied to buy them. So when you add up all this, the commercial revolution, the ability to navigate, the price revolution, which creates an incentive to go into employ business, all of these revolutions taken together can be said to be that's the reason why Europe wants to expand, and that's the reason why Europe is able to expand. It's able also, let's add one more element to that. When Native Americans began to die off, as they do for a number of reasons, Europeans discover Africans, and of course they put Africans into the service of this whole kind of system that has been evolving. And much of the, into the 16th century and into the 17th century is actually based on slavery. Unfortunately, slavery has a lot to do with the expansion and the domination of Europe. So add all of this together, and what you've got is a very dominant Europe.